Yeah, knowing that it's human. It's a human disease. If you're human, you could get it.
Monday you were diagnosed with AIDS, HIV, and Friday you were dead.
We can live a wonderful life and we can do whatever we want to do as long as we're taking care of ourselves. I wake up and I take 1 pill a day. That's the difference from me and somebody that's HIV negative. That's it.
A lot of people showed up to take care of us, but we took care of each other for the most part through all this. I could show you pictures where there's 14 of us in a picture and 2 of them are still alive today.
So I hope people see this and realize we're still here.
In June of 1981, the CDC published its first report, raising concerns about opportunistic infections found in previously healthy gay men living in Los Angeles. By the end of that year, there were a total of 337 cases of individuals with severe immune deficiency in the United States. 321 adults, 16 children, 130 dead by December 31st.
In the beginning, we had no idea what we were dealing with.
I was in a leather bar, and people were milling around and talking, and one of my friends came up and he goes, "Did you hear about this thing where people are dying in New York and San Francisco, and there's an article in it, in the, I guess it was the Journal of American Medical Association." And we didn't have the internet, so I wasn't able to verify that or look it up, and I just said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. There's no sexual disease that kills you. You know, all we knew is that if you got gonorrhea, you got a shot. Syphilis, or anything, you took a pill, you know." Yeah.
I became aware that something was going on with the publication by CDC of cases of pneumocystis and Kaposi sarcoma in gay men and drug users in LA and New York. That was the summer of 80 or 81. I'm getting old and I don't remember.
And the idea of a fatal venereal disease was well, where I was in Chicago, nobody believed it. Well, then the next 2 years, we believed it.
And actually, Dr. Katz, who at the time was not our medical director, but several years later did become the medical director for the health department, he provided some education to us about, they called it GERD at that time, or GRID.
GRID, or gay-related immunodeficiency, was the first name given to the illnesses being reported primarily in gay men in 1981. But by 1982, the CDC had relabeled the immune deficiency as AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, signaling a more accurate understanding of the disease and its impact. And a year later, in 1983, the virus causing AIDS, HIV, was discovered. It took 4 more years and the loss of 15,000 lives before the US government finally acknowledged the virus publicly, and many more years passed before a national response was mounted and adequate funding became available.
President Ronald Reagan, he let millions of people die that didn't need to die. He did. He let people die that didn't need to die.
It was just death everywhere.
Like I said, some days, you know, it'd be a good day and you'd hear that, you know, Steve, yeah, he ate today and he was feeling really good. And then, you know, by Friday, he's gone. He's gone.
This delay resulted in an enormous loss of life and the rampant spread of misinformation, the impact of which we are still combating to this day.
We still live in a world of, well, that doesn't happen to me, it happens to you. It doesn't happen to me, it happens to you because, you know, you take drugs or you do this or you do that. Well, you know what? Heterosexual people get HIV too. But we still live in this world of, well, I'm not one of those people. I'm not one of those people. And it just really breaks my heart because I'm like, yes, you are. Yes, you absolutely are.
There was years when I would even tell people they were positive, and the first thing they say to me is, but I'm not gay.
I had never looked at myself as being gay. I never in my life did I. So I never thought that that affected me.
But I have to say the case that really stuck in my mind and really said to me, this is for real. And I need to get out there and provide more education to my community, was a young African-American woman around my age at the time, married, had 2 kids just like I had 2 kids, just like I'm married, a professional woman. I felt like I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I had to tell her she was HIV positive. That was a huge impact on me.
It's in the Black community, it's in heterosexual couples, it's in marriages, it's in all of these other places, but when we show or portray it, we're not showing those other things.
You don't know. You know, you don't know. This is a people's disease. I could be here with it. You know, I've had people who say, are you the one? You know, if you think I am, then yes, I am.
As of 2022, some 40 million people have died from HIV since the beginning of the epidemic in 1981. And while much has changed about the diagnosis of this people's disease over the decades, much still remains the same. Which brings us to today. Over the course of 5 decades, so much has changed about what it means to be diagnosed with HIV. Thanks to countless advances in prevention and treatment, what was once a death sentence is now a chronic condition, and it even seems that a cure might be hovering just over the horizon. But as we look forward at this future, we can't lose sight of the past. We have to bring the stories with us and see this disease through the eyes of survivors who have paid the price of progress. We have to go back.
Well, let's start from the beginning.
So that we can be sure we've become the kind of people who will write the sort of ending this story deserves.
Bobby Stainsbury, I grew up in West End of Davenport, West 4th Street. I had one mom and one dad, and they were straight. I love straight people. And then when I was 11 years old, I used to go fishing at the levee with my grandfather. We were driving through one day to go fishing, and he said, Bobby, you see that guy right there? I said, yeah. He goes, look, good looking, well dressed. He's a banker up there at Davenport Bank. He's queer. I was like, what? He goes, he's queer, he likes men. And I'm like, okay, ding, 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 ding. I can tell you, everybody knew I was gay from 5th grade, maybe, somewhere, when I said I was 11, 12, 13 years old. And I just had the same childhood as anybody else. We all got along. You fight your neighbor once in a while here or there. But, I had to run home from school. And in 5th grade, I don't even remember why it happened, but the principal came into a trailer that they used to have outside the schools because the schools were overpopulated or something. And he comes in and he's got this big board. I mean, a board, like a big board. And he comes in and he takes me out of my chair like this and smacks me with that board. Well, from that day on, Bobby Stansbury's a queer, faggot queer. I don't think we even used faggot back then, but. And yeah, from that day on, I never learned another thing in school because I was running for my life.
My name is Kent Douglas, and I grew up in Davenport. Well, born in Moline, but we moved over there when I was 3. I stayed in Davenport till I was 18, went all through schools in Davenport. I can remember being 5 years old and just knowing that there was things that I couldn't let other people know about, but I knew. I had a big old crush on my brother-in-law. He was, anyway, my sister was a lot older. She got married when I was 5, and I remember just looking up at him and being like, anyway, I had a great mom. Both my parents were great. I was real lucky with that. I came out to my mom when I was 16. She already knew. I mean, I've got the mannerisms and all that. She was always, I think she was probably always worried. And I came out to my dad when I was 18, and we were really worried what he was going to do. He was just like, oh, I've got friends in business. They're like you. They're nice guys. He was like, is this going to make you happy? I was getting ready to go away to college. And I was just like, I was speechless. I expected this big Irish blow up from him, and nothing. Nothing. He just went back to reading the paper, seriously. I went away to Iowa City to go to college, and there were, right away, there was a table set up to join the Gay Liberation Front at registration. And so I clonked up in my platform heels, and I'm like, get me in there. And then it just all started to open up. I remember seeing a copy of After Dark magazine, which I think is now defunct, but it was kind of a gay magazine back then. And I could read between the lines and everything in that, and I saw the way the ads looked and the people in the ads. And over the next year, I got the idea. I thought, I am ditching this life, and I'm tired of doing what everybody told me to do and be what everybody thinks I should be. I'm getting out of here. And I bought a plane ticket to New York City and went. I moved in '76. In the spring, and by summer, I had met the man I was going to stay with for 29 years. And I just knew. It just...
I was born and raised by my mom and my dad, and they are young parents. My mom had me, well, she was pregnant when she was 15 with me, so she ended up having me at 16. Her birthday's in June, mine is in July. So she was, you know, just shy of her 16th birthday by the time she had me. Then my mom and my dad ended up breaking up, I do believe, when I was in the 3rd grade, so we ended up moving to Davenport. So that was a little different. I think that kind of changed my life and took it into a different direction. I lived in Davenport for a long time. We moved to an apartment complex, which would have been the projects, you know, except it's a different term for it now. It's low-income housing. So we moved into low-income housing from this nice house, you know, that we had with my dad and whatnot. And my dad, I love him with all my heart, Daddy, but my dad ended up, you know, having other children with different women at the time. And he tried to get away. He had moved out of town, and I think he had bigger aspirations, you know, because he was an accountant. He worked for the government. He was my hero. I mean, I just loved him so much. He would send me to work, or not work, that's what it felt like. He would send me to school in the 3rd grade with this briefcase because he got all this stuff, you know, from the arsenal. And he would have me sitting at the table reading the newspaper, and I hated it. I'm like, what is the significance of this? Why am I doing this? And he said that he wanted me to be well-rounded. He wanted me to be able to fit into any conversation when I got into an elevator, and I didn't know the significance of that, you know, until I was grown. I will never forget whispering in my 7th grade history teacher. I love history. I loved history. And I had to tell Mr. Roby in his ear, I'm a girl, not a boy. And the poor man could not remember to save his life because he was just that way. And he didn't mean anything by it. And at that time, I'm like, well, hell, he's right. I mean, I just couldn't, you know what I'm saying, at that age, because I didn't know what transgender was. I didn't know anything about that. I just knew that I was different. And I knew that there was not anyone else in the world like me. When I was, I think, 20 years old, I was trying to find my crowd. I wanted to find my crowd. I didn't fit in anywhere. My friends, we were all going to the straight clubs, you know, and the black straight clubs. So, you know, we were going, you know, I'm partying, you know, this and that. I never fit in. You know, I never fit in. I had gays trying to pick me up, you know, all the time. And I was like really uncomfortable with this attention. So I had a fake ID. So when I was 20 years old, I went to JR's, and I was like, oh my God, you know, I got in, you know, my fake ID, you know, my Daisy Dukes on. So I went to JR's, and they had a drag show. And the first queen I seen, oh my God, it was Dina Katz. And she had these humongous girls. That's what I call them, your girls. She did. She had huge girls. And I remember this big woman coming at me, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't be that. You know, I just knew that I didn't want to be that. You know, I couldn't be that because I had already, I don't know, I didn't come from a family like that. I mean, and being gay is one thing, but when, I mean, you know, my community, okay, it's okay as long as you don't wear a dress. There's always that, okay, you know, you can be that, don't you wear no dress and embarrass me, you know. So there was that, and I knew I didn't want to be that, you know. So one of the owners there, or the show director, I will never forget, he read me down to the ground, and he said, "You are trans. You want to be a woman." I was like, "No, I do not. You know, I do not." I said, "I don't want to be that." I said, "That is, you know, I really did. I went hard. That's the last thing I wanted to be." You know, he didn't. I was so mad at him. And I went home, and I never forgot. That's when I kind of came into my own, you know, and I've always known it, but it was something that I had to, you know, I had to kind of repress. I couldn't, you know, I couldn't think of that. You know, I couldn't be that because I was supposed to be successful. And I was, you know, I guess I was groomed to be successful, honey. You best believe it. I mean, I had a briefcase in the 3rd grade.
Well, my name is Destiny Smith. I feel like such a grown-up because now I use my last name all the time. I was born and raised in Davenport, Iowa. Growing up in our household, though both my parents were alcoholics and drug addicts, but like as kids, it wasn't like so bad that like they were just gone and didn't pay attention to us. So all the time we used to play games in the house. My dad had this game called Blind Man. So we would just, this is the one time we can walk on the couch and jump on the couch and do whatever we want to do in the house. So you would close your eyes and then you would have to find everybody else around the house. But I feel like my whole family has always been close. I'm very family oriented, like barbecues and stuff like that. Even when our parents was drinking and having fun, all the kids would be at this same house. We might be upstairs somewhere, but I feel like they always made sure we all were around each other. I don't feel like it impacted my childhood with my mom because she was still always around. When my dad was around, he was present, but I think 12 going on 13 or 11 going on 12 is really when it affected us. Our house got raided, so we had to move out and we had to move in with my grandma. And at that time, everybody was living with us. So all of my grandma's other children were living with us. So everybody left our house to go to her house. And our house was a house and her house was an apartment with 1 bedroom. I think that's really when I started noticing my mom's drug problem, because then she wasn't around. She was around, but like with her job, she would travel, and then sometimes she just wouldn't come back. So we would have to get up and get ourselves ready for school, go to school ourselves. We'll see her when we see her, basically. But I feel like through most of it, I feel like once we got to maybe 9th grade or 10th grade, my mom ended up finding a house, and we ended up moving in, and she met her husband, and we were back in our own rooms, and then she did try to go to rehab. She went once, it didn't work, it didn't click. She went a second time, and I feel like after that second time, but at this point we're about to be adults now, so it's like, but it changed because now we're back in our own house and we see our mom more because she's always home, but we're older now, so it's like everything has already happened. So
4 people. 4 different stories about race and class and religion and stigma and love and loss. 1 diagnosis that has changed the trajectory of each of their lives.
So we think that the first cases in the U.S. were in the late 70s, and we were seeing these people with, it's called lymphadenopathy, enlarged glands, in 81 and 82, and we'd biopsy them, and they all looked alike under the microscope, but we still didn't have a unifying definition of what was going on. So 83, 84, we started seeing full-blown AIDS patients here, and actually the first several came back from San Francisco, New York, LA, here to be with their families to develop support systems and get care for what was looking like a lethal disease.
Well, you know, it started out with a big blast. And of course we were all, you know, young, you know, it ain't gonna get me, it ain't gonna get me. And then the people I came out with, we're all, and we started scattering across the country. I'm moving. So where did we move to? We moved to the big cities. And this is still going on. And this, I moved in I think it was 1983, 84. I moved to Dallas, Texas, and I should remember these dates, but I don't. And yeah, we're down there, we're rocking it, we're having all the fun we want to have, you know, being freaks, whatever you want to call it, doing drugs. Well, the next thing you know, we all got HIV and we all come back home.
It was mid-'80s when we started to see large numbers, hundreds, eventually, many hundreds, that acquired the disease locally, the infection locally.
My first really big symptom came in '87. I seroconverted in the fall of '83. I know exactly when it was, who it was. I hold no, takes two. Nobody knew anything. Nobody really, even in '83 in Chicago, people still didn't believe it. They still thought it was 1978 and that this would all go away. And I remember people telling me, there was a bar on Halsted, I think it was called Christopher Street, and I remember somebody saying, this is all a bunch of crap. He said, they're gonna come out with a cure just like with everything else. You'll take a pill or a shot, you'll be fine, So like, the band played on. I was on vacation with my parents, and I was in Texas, and all of a sudden I felt like pains coming here. Well, it turned out to be shingles, a really bad case of shingles. And within a couple of days, it was wrapped all around me. And from my friends, I knew that was one of the things they told me to watch out for, because at whatever age I was then, 30 or something, it's not really normal to get shingles now like that. And I told my mom and cried and cried and cried, because to me that was just confirmation, that it was really starting. So after that, I just buried my head in the sand, is kind of the way I did. I knew I was going to be next, and so by this time years had passed. Everybody I knew was gone or going, everybody except my partner. He didn't have it.
And it wasn't just the absence of an effective treatment that made this diagnosis so devastating. It was also the way the world reacted, the way that people treated people. The impact of the stigma was second only to the impact of the disease itself.
A lot of people showed up to take care of us, but we took care of each other for the most part through all this. Yeah, we did. When you go to a funeral every other day and it's your friend laying there, it's horrific. And and back then they seemed like they would, you couldn't even get it. But my boyfriend Kimmy died. His name was Kimmy, K-E-M-M-Y. And when he died, we couldn't even get a funeral home to take him in Dallas. So then, this gay guy, guess what he is? He's a mortician. This gay guy, guess what he is? He's a limousine driver, This guy, he's a preacher, a reverend, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, we all came together. Oh, this guy's a banker. Look what he's got. He's got some money to help us, And all the drag queens in the community and bartenders and bar owners, everybody just came together, and we'd have big, huge shows, raise $80, $90, $150,000,
I remember being on the street and cars of kids going by, a group of us, and saying, hey, faggot, you got AIDS and all that stuff. And my friends would be like, well, come here, we'll give it to you, I can't do that. And so I just, that was part of also drawing away. I didn't want that to happen to me. I didn't want to be the one that people were pointing at and say, well, look how bad he looks.
But even though the response on a broad scale was negligent and abusive, in communities across the country, there were grassroots efforts designed to meet the needs of the people who were diagnosed and dying from this disease. The Quad Cities community was no exception.
The folks at Genesis, and most particularly Leo Bressanelli, certain members of the nursing staff who might be named Sandy Millage now, and others, stepped up, and we had what we needed. And we had the advantage of what looks to me like a slower increase in the number of cases for the first 3 or 4 years.
So it started with Bill Coffey, owner of JR's, and Clayton Pearson and a lot of members from the community, people with HIV/AIDS at the time. And it just started in the coat room. No, started in the bar actually, because everybody saw these needs that all these people needed, you know? Money, food, clothes, the works. And it started in the coat room. So then, you know, of course it got worse and got worse.
This grassroots effort converged with the work being done by doctors and nurses on the front lines to create a more organized way to serve and support people diagnosed with HIV.
So it really was the ideal of Dr. Katz. As he was starting to see more patients in his office, he realized that people need more than just the medical care. They need support. They need education. And so he pulled the two hospitals together at the time. It was Mercy and St. Luke's, and the health departments, Rock Island Health Department and Scott County, and then community health care. We all came together at a meeting, and he wanted to start an AIDS coalition. And so actually the building is still there, but it's called something different now. Where we started at is on Main, the corner of Main and 6th, I think it is. And so in the beginning, we received money just to do education. Go out in the community to try to educate people on how to stop the spread. And as the federal government provided more money, then we were given money for support groups. We were given money to provide testing. We were given money to help establish the AIDS project. And so at that point, the AIDS Coalition, as it was called at that time, was given some funding, and the project was able to hire a director to kind of direct services.
So they found someone, Beth Weirman, their sweet lady, at the old 605 Main, there was I think it was Best Western Hotel. And they had changed it into office, you know, suites or whatever. And you walk into this suite, Beth Weirman was there, and there's boxes, and you can see these are pamphlets about HIV/AIDS, and boxes over here, that's medicine, and boxes over here, clothes, you know. It was very disorganized in this little tiny hotel room. Then there was one next door as well that had a little bit more organization, but everything was just crazy.
Her name is Beth Weirman. She grew up in Indiana in a small little town called Rochester, and she moved to Iowa later in life and met my dad. And they moved from the Des Moines area down to the Quad Cities in the early 80s. She was just a really passionate advocate for her daughters, for her family, but also for her community. And you know, originally growing up, she wanted to be a doctor, but women were not doctors. And so she could be a nurse or she could be a teacher. And so she went to be a nurse. And it was, at the time, it was AIDS Coalition, or the Quad Cities AIDS Coalition is what it was. And then she met Rob Duslier, and Rob Duslier was her best friend.
The story of HIV in our local community cannot be told without talking about Rob Duslier, a prominent activist in the 80s. Rob's contributions to local efforts are still impacting the way that we support people living with HIV to this day.
Rob was something special. Rob's the one who changed a lot of hearts and minds in this community at that time. And he partnered with her, and they lifted each other up and they kept each other going. So they continued to build things together, and they strategized. They strategized things like, well, we're the Quad Cities AIDS Project, but why would you think to look in the queues for that? So let's call it AIDS Project Quad Cities. And so the fact that it's the project now is really huge, because I feel like that was born from AIDS Project Quad Cities. And the whole point was to get it earlier in the phone book so that people would see it. Yep. And so I think she really had a knack for that, for bringing things out and humanizing things.
While the local efforts continued to grow roots in the Quad Cities, there was also some movement on the national front. In 1987, a small sliver of hope appeared when AZT, the first drug approved by the FDA to treat HIV, was released on the market.
That's how it was. People were going to Mexico and getting this drug called AZT. We got a drug, we got a drug. And then we'd go get it, And it'd be boxes of it, bottles, and they would try to pass it, all of it out to all of us, you know, so you could have it for the week. Because, you know, it wasn't coming from a pharmacy, it was coming from Mexico.
After a while, I heard of AZT. I saw what it did to my friends. It killed them. I mean, they were taking 25, 50 pills a day, is what they told me. And they lived miserably for maybe 6 more months than they might have. Miserably. And that wasn't for me.
My boyfriend was one of the few that got it at Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas, Texas. When you took it, you take 4 pills every 4 hours. What's that, 32 pills a day? And my Kimmy, he would always say, Bob, they're poisoning me. They're poisoning me. They're poisoning. And literally that's what was happening, you know, we were being poisoned.
We would have people that were on double handfuls of drugs to treat any number of what were called opportunistic infections. And it was miserable. There were many times when what we were doing to treat was as bad as the disease, up to and including dying from the disease. I mean, it was more than a few patients that said to me between the early 80s and the mid and late 90s, I'd rather die than keep doing what we're doing.
So the 80s ended with little promise as the virus continued to spread. And by 1994, AIDS had become the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 25 to 44.
It was a long time in the lives of people who were affected between that recognition in the very early 80s and actually understanding that there was a virus, HIV we call it now, and the recognition of the virus and of how it did its damage then led to a cascade of events that resulted in a variety of approaches to treating the complications of HIV infection and HIV infection itself. And that whole thing, that whole sequence ran from 80-81 to actually December of 1996.
The more cases we saw, and we knew that there were medical trials going on, but there was never any good results.
But there were some advancements.
See, well, I'm gonna say 1993, there was a drug called Crixivan. Everybody in the community was on Crixivan. It was a pill about this big, you know. It was white, Crixivan, it said on the side. But well, everybody started feeling better, you know. People weren't dying as fast. And, you know, it took a while for it to, you know, kick in for everyone. But yeah, that was our first sign of hope.
In the mid-90s, we got some of the early data on combination antiviral therapy using AZT, DDI, DDC, D4T, plus the protease inhibitor drugs. And it was like somebody had turned on a light in a dark room. I had people who are still alive in the Quad Cities in the mid-80s and into the 90s who were dying of 4 and 5 of these, what we called opportunistic infections, literally turning into a puddle in the hospital. We put them on the drugs. They got up, walked out within weeks, and they're still alive.
And some expanded support on the local front.
I'm Kathy Jordan, and I work currently with De La Cerda House in Rock Island. De La Cerda House, for the history of De La Cerda, started in 1994 as a group of 5 individuals in Rock Island who did not want to see their friend Jim De La Cerda's memory just fade. And he died of AIDS. And so there was a spirit of a grassroots organization born in a nonprofit to provide housing for people who are literally dying of AIDS. The first initial flagship, if you will, is Rob's House, which is our congregate housing. Many people think of it like short-term housing. Transitional housing has many different names. But it was a home that De La Cerda bought in 1996. And at that time, Rob Dusler was on our board of directors. And he really pushed the board to get this house up and going when he himself was dying of AIDS. And many people in this community remember Rob from Rob's life, where every day for a year we watched his life and everything that he experienced while still living and unfortunately dying from a treacherous disease. Rob died in April of 1996, a month before we opened Rob's house.
Even though it would be many more years before substantial advances in treatment were discovered, the tide did begin to turn some as we welcomed the new century, leading to lower mortality rates and a change in the way we understood the diagnosis, a change that led to hope for many.
Finally, in 2001, I was so bad off. My partner's mother had died, so he didn't have any reason to stay in Chicago anymore. And I wanted to go back here to Davenport. And my idea was that this is where I was going to die. My mom saw me and she said, "You've got to go to the doctor." So we went to the doctor and he said, "I've never seen anybody so anemic." I forget what the reading was, but it was bad. My mom was just, we got into the parking lot and I started the car and she said, "Just talk to me." And she said, "I wanted you to go back in and do what they want you to do." And I knew she wanted me to take the test, and so I said, I'll go. So I went back in. Well, I can't really remember how it came down, but I ended up meeting a Dr. Katz. So he did the test on me. And I don't know if it was 2 weeks maybe back then that I had to wait. I don't know what it was, but it was quite a wait. And my sister and my mom went with me to get the results, which I already thought in my head, well, they'd just call me and say, "You're all right," if I was all right. So my mom and my sister, and we sat on the examining table together. My sister was holding one hand, my mom was holding the other. And he came in and told me, this is why I shouldn't have been surprised at all. You know, I knew, but there it was. Then, thank God, Nurse Sandy marches in with these charts and pill models and stuff. She said, "This is what we're going to start you on." And she said, "You have to follow everything to the letter, right?" I mean, I bought a watch with 5 alarms on it because they put me on so much medicine at the time because I didn't really have too many T cells left. I was full-blown AIDS. Once I saw it in black and white and there were medicines and there was a chance, then it was like, let's get it done. A year later, I was in there and he said, "Your numbers are coming up. You're actually above 200 now. And, you know, it's going good like that." He said, "Do you mind if we have a student in here during our examination?" I was like, "Sure, you know." And they were talking behind my back. I'm sitting there on the examining table and he says to the student, he says, "This is one of my star patients." He said, "A year ago he came in here. He had about a 1 in 4 chance of even making it." He said, "I didn't think he'd make it." And he said, "But he did everything he was supposed to do, and here he is."
That's exactly what it was, a shift in medications. You know, the Crixivan done it, a lot of us good, but others they didn't do so good. So then, and I don't remember the names of the drugs because I have taken across the board, you know, that little pill thing in the doctor's office that has all these shapes of pills and what they are. Yeah, there's only 4 on there that I haven't taken, you know, plain and simple.
A shift in medication. This would be the defining factor that would change the fight against HIV/AIDS throughout most of the 21st century to the present day. A defining factor that finally changed this diagnosis from a death sentence to a manageable chronic disease.
January 2016. And mind you, I got sick at the end of 2015.
Sure.
So by the time January came, I'm like, okay, well, I can go. There's a free clinic here. I'll go. And I knew that I would probably have to wait, but I didn't know I would have to wait that long. So we went in January, and they're like, okay, well, we're too full. You know, we're busy this month. You'll have to come back next month. I'm like, I don't even know if I'll make it, you know, till next month. The time we made it to the free clinic, where my friend finally took me for my February appointment that I made it to, I was 106 pounds after weighing 160 some odd pounds. I didn't know I was that small. I could not even stand up on my own. I had to hold my friend to stand up. He had to walk with me when they called my name, excuse me, to go to the back. And when they told me to get on the scale and they weighed me, when they said the 106 or whatever, I fainted, you know. I ended up getting rushed to the hospital. And while I was in the hospital, they were doing all these tests, a bunch of tests. They didn't know what was wrong with me either. Okay, do you think that you might be at risk for HIV? No, I don't. You know, none of that. I just didn't. You know, I was going down the things that I thought, and I had been researching, you know, on WebMD, you know. I had been getting my medication. I thought it was multiple sclerosis. Those were the symptoms that I had, so that was the closest thing to it. But I was down for a long time with all this family around me. And then my doctor came in, and she told me, it may have been before this, I don't know. She said, you know, you have AIDS. And it was crushing, you know, to hear that. And it was also crushing because it was very clinical, you know, the way that it was, you know, it was kind of clinical, the way that it was presented. Most of the time, I was stunned because I was always very, very, okay, you got to have the pill, you got to have the, you know, it was always one of those times. You know, they had them everywhere. When you went out, they had the, you know, a bunch of, you know, condoms. So you grab a bunch of condoms, you know, everywhere you go, so you always have the condoms. I mean, I still have some. No, I haven't been active in years, but, you know, that's just what you do, and that's what the lifestyle was, you know. So I thought I was, but at the same time, doing drugs, you're not going to always be safe. You're going to miss stuff, you know. So I'm quite sure that may or may not have happened. I never had the chance. Oh, is this what happened? Is this what happened? I tried, but you'll go crazy doing that. Where did I get this? Okay, good. I finally went to my appointment, and he said, you know, hey, you're doing really good, and you are undetectable. And I didn't really know exactly what that meant, if it just meant I didn't things no more. You know, I didn't know what it meant. But then he explained to me that that means that I can't pass it on to anybody, you know, as long as you adhere to your medication, you know. So I'm like, okay, that's good.
Undetectable. It's a word Carrie never thought she'd hear. A word that changed the trajectory of her life and transformed the landscape of what it means to be living with HIV.
So I found out in 2017, I was 22 and pregnant with my second child. I actually found out at work. I was already a single mom to a son. I was working 2 jobs. And my doctor's office called me to come in, but like we already had an appointment scheduled for like a month or so away, and I just couldn't miss work. So I told them they could just, whatever it was, you can tell me when I get there. But I guess it was so important that the health department had to call me. And I told the health department lady she could come to my job because nobody's thinking they're coming to you to tell you that you have HIV. And I thought she had the wrong person, but then she gave me paperwork. And I numbed, like I completely went somewhere else. She tried to explain everything. But at that time, I didn't know anything other than what I've seen on movies. So I asked her when I was gonna die and what was gonna happen to my baby. And she tried to explain to me like it's not a death sentence anymore and da-da-da-da, but that hearing it's like it, and I didn't know anything about it. I just wasn't trying to hear what she had to say. And then I went back to work and I finished my shift because if I went home, then what she just told me was real.
Okay. I'm Charlotte B.I.G. and I am Destiny Smith's mom. So she told me that she had went to her doctor, she had all these tests, you know, and she was like, yeah, I know they have been trying to reach me, you know, but with the holidays, I was doing this, doing that. She was like, but when they let me know, I'll let you know, because we talked about things like that. And so after Christmas, I was at work, middle of the night. I worked the 3rd shift, and she called me, but she wouldn't say anything. And my heart was like, I told her, I don't care what the F or what those people, what that doctor said to you, whatever I'm thinking is worse than whatever they said to you. So please talk to me. Please tell me, you know, what's wrong. And she said they said I have HIV. And she started crying. I started crying, you know. And in my mind, you know, I'm a child of the 70s and the 80s, and so I felt like people were going to treat her wrong, and I felt like they weren't going to understand, and they weren't going to accept my baby, and they weren't going to treat her right. And I just could think of how people treated people in the 80s. And Destiny had you know, I have a person on my side of my family who had AIDS, and there was a person on her dad's side that had AIDS, and I watched how they treated him, you know, how they treated both of those people. And so that is what came to mind for me. But I had to go back to work. The person that was coming on after me happened to come in early, and I was like, well, you know, I have a family emergency, can I leave? And they were like, yeah. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I pull up at Destiny's house, like, come outside right now, come out. And she comes out, and I just hold her, and I touch her, and I tell her that I love her, and that you will be held, you will be touched, you will know I'll be there for you every step of this way. It doesn't matter, I'll be there.
I fell into a really, really bad depression, and I couldn't take care of my son. I was functioning in depression. So like I would get up and I would go to work and I would come home, and I would get up and I would go to work and I would come home. And I was living with my cousin at the time, so I didn't really have to take care of my son. And nobody knew I was positive except for my child's father, my mom, and my best friend at that time. But one day my cousin wasn't home, and I did have to take care of my son, and I couldn't get out the bed, and he was crying for hours, and like I could hear the cries, and if I look up I could see him, but I couldn't get myself out of the bed. So that day it just kind of woke me up, like I can't just sit here and be depressed. And then I had a baby in my stomach too, so I had to think about them. So it wasn't more so for me, it was for my kids. And then the next day I finally called the doctor so I could get on the medicine, and I was undetectable within like 3 weeks.
22 years old, pregnant, and undetectable within 3 weeks. When you consider the way this story started, it seems almost too good to be true, except that it isn't that at all. It isn't the result of wishful thinking or random chance. It is the direct result of adequate funding, legislation, and advocacy. It is exactly what the people diagnosed with this virus deserved from the very beginning. It is the same kind of support that they deserve to this day.
Because none of us thought that we were going to live this long, many of us did things like maxed out their credit cards, didn't plan for the future, you know all. So many people I know, me included, have nothing to fall back on. We're just kind of like living day to day because we didn't think we'd be here. It's easy to understand, and we need help. Housing, decent housing.
Jay, but I didn't think that I was even going to be here. I didn't get a car. I just got rid of everything, and I was just inclined to stay, you know, in my position and just wait for the Grim Reaper to knock on my door.
I have a therapist that he always says, the only thing I can think of that would compare to the several decades you went through is like if I was treating a Holocaust survivor. Only people still don't even talk about this. It's like now, once the drugs came out, I think everybody thought, okay, it's cured now.
But it isn't. There is more work to be done in this fight. We need more funding and better legislation that advances the notion that healthcare is a human right for all people. We need vocal advocates in our communities, who are willing to stand alongside survivors and amplify the truth about this disease.
Well, now you can do it with a couple of pills a day. If somebody had told me this in 1996, when I was seeing what Crixivan could do, I would have said, huh, yeah, right.
Yes, there's people who get to my comments and they ask me a lot of the times, or they tell me I'm selfish because I've created these children, I'm gonna die at this, like they just know at this certain age, because I live with HIV, I'm gonna die when I'm probably gonna live longer than them. So I just feel like people should be open-minded to learning about the virus instead of just sticking to this one thing that they heard from their parents that lived when it first came out and it was killing people so fast. Because if cell phones can change in 30 years and running shoes can change in 30 years and the internet can change in 30, why can't medicine?
No, like I said, take your medicine, and you can sit around and cry and bawl and be all boo, oh, poor me, or you go live your life,
With as far as the HIV and anything goes like that, I want to continue doing this work. I love doing this work. And I know now that there aren't a lot of people that are apt to speaking up, and I see why. You can get shamed to no end, but I've been talked about my entire life, so nothing like this would ever hurt me. So I just think that I was one of the best people for this, because there's nothing that you can say about me that hasn't already been said.
Just seeing all the changes, like now we have injectables you can get and all of that stuff within the last 5 years, not even just like from the 80s, but a lot of that has changed from the time that I contracted it till now. So it's amazing things. It just makes me happy. My insides glow from it.
And we need you to remember that the fight isn't over. And so for Kent.
So I hope people see this and realize we're still here. Hey, my mom lived to be 100, almost 101, with things that I'm doing to try to be as healthy as I can. Even though I'm 67, I might have another 33 years. Jesus had 33 years. He got a lot done,
And for Carrie.
This is not a disease. AIDS is not a death sentence. It's really not. I know it sounds like a cliche. It's not bad. You can have a full life. You can love, you can have love in your life.
For Destiny.
I love negative comments more than I love positive comments because it keeps them coming back. Like, yeah, it's negative, but at the same time, they're learning because they're reading my response as they're trying to argue with me. So sooner or later, they'll wake up one day and be like, dang, that girl's still living, so she must have been right when she was talking about the medicine change.
And for Bobby.
You never know what might happen. I'm supposed to live to be 100.
For the hope of 100th birthdays and the beauty of every moment in between.
My grandmother promised me if I promised her. Bitch, live to be 100.
For everyone who came before and for everyone who will come after.